Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place.
Hey, Jolie.
And we have the excellent opportunity in front of us to talk to somebody who knows their stuff.
Yes, she does.
And someone who's been around the block. So we're going to talk to Kathy Labriola today. And first off, Kathy wrote the Jealousy Workbook. And if you are non-monogamous and have ever felt a little tinge of the green-eyed Sutton, then you know the Jealousy Workbook because it is often the first resource that is passed to you. And as a jealousy researcher, I'm just deeply grateful that Kathy's work exists and that she's been doing this work for such a long time.
Yeah, so grateful. And what an opportunity to get to have her here talking with her.
Yeah, and we're specifically talking about poly elders. And this is a topic that I think it feels like a natural fit for you and I because we are often working with people who are in their second half of adult life, and there's just not that much out there, right? And I'm it's wonderful that we have fantastic resources, and we also have this amazing resource of the people who've been out there doing it. And so I'm super excited. And Kathy has just contributed so much over the years to the community at large, to the resource base. It's wonderful. So we're going to have a great conversation. Let me introduce her, get us set up for that.
Yes.
Kathy Labriola is a nurse, counselor, and hypnotherapist in Berkeley, California. She's provided affordable mental health services to alternative communities for the past 30 years. Kathy is also author of 4 books on consensual non-monogamy: Love in Abundance, A Counselor's Advice on Open Relationships, The Jealousy Workbook, The Polyamory Breakup Book, Causes, Survival. Come on, we need a polyamorous breakup book. Even if you think we don't, we do. And the one we're talking about most today, Polyamorous Elders, Aging in Open Relationships. Kathy's been a card-carrying bisexual polyamorist for 50 years, and she's extra crunchy. She rides a bike, lives in a housing co-op, grows organic veggies, raises chickens. And you can find more about Kathy at kathylabriola.com. We'll have links for that in the chat. You can find her books anywhere books are sold. Let's get into this awesome conversation. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. I am, first off, so honored to have your voice, your deep wisdom and expertise here, but also I'm just thrilled to get to talk about a topic I don't think we've ever taken on Playing with Fire. So thanks for coming to talk with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here. So I'm thrilled to hear what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So, our listeners often hear us talk about polyamory for the newbie, for the person who's just starting out or they're transitioning out of monogamy. But there is a whole wide world of life to have after that transition in phase. And something that I just don't think gets spoken about enough altogether is, what does elderhood look like if you're non-monogamous? What is it? And there is nobody, I think, in the world more perfectly situated to talk about that than you. Kathy, would you just tell us a little bit about why you talk about elderhood and polyamory?
Yes, actually, lots of reasons. But one of the reasons is that when I was a young polyamorous woman many, many years ago, there did not seem to be anyone doing any kind of consensually non-monogamous relationships that was over like 25 or 30. And there were no elders to learn from or to see as role models. And when there's no role models, and it's hard to visualize that it's possible and hard to believe in something. And I certainly can speak as a queer person that, when I was young, queer people were invisible as well, and not having any elders or role models, it made it hard to visualize, like, what is life going to be like, and how will I do this, and how will I be this, and how will I ever make this work? So I think for one thing, I really hope that the book Poly Elders will be useful to younger people in seeing that there's a vast array of elders out there that have been polyamorous for 20, 30, 40, 50 years or more even, and are successful, happy, making it work, and that there are many different options of how polyamory can look as you go through various phases of life, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and on, that it may look different at different phases and stages of your life. And yeah, and there are so many choices and so many options, so many different poly models that are available to you, and you can see examples of those in older people who have been doing this for a long time.
That's
Kathy,
wonderful.
I love that. And so
Mhm.
I would consider myself in my mid years. I'm 48 and Ken is 57. And I know myself, I'm often looking for like, okay, I'm not a kid anymore. Where does this go from here? And I feel it. I feel the lack of elderhood around me. I feel how in my local communities and that there's this bias toward the younger, the image at least of the
Mhm,
younger
mhm.
person, right? So it seems to me that there are lots and lots of poly elders, but I, I'm asked frequently about like, well, does this ever work out? I'm like, yeah, but you don't hear about it because they're just happy. They're just
Yeah,
happy and they're
yeah.
at home and they're not. And so I feel it myself as a person who's like, wow, yeah, where do we go from here? And I love that you're talking about many models because
Oh,
we all
yeah.
have to we all have to custom design and redesign. What so you took the time and energy. Now you've written several staples for our larger community. So before we go any further, I want to say if you are thinking, geez, that name Kathy Labriola, that's familiar. It's because you've read the Jealousy Workbook. It's that. It's because
Probably.
it's probably that. Like that's that when I think of your name, I think you were the first person's work who I came across myself when I was struggling. Oh, this. And now I'm a jealousy researcher myself. And I'm so grateful that you wrote that book. So deeply grateful. And then you also wrote the polyamory breakup book. So there's other resources. I find your resources to be deep and powerful, but this one in particular, the Poly Elders book.
Well, every time I'm in the process of writing a book, everyone says to me, "Oh, no, don't write a book about that. Why are you writing a book about that? No, stop."
Exactly.
Apparently I pick extremely unpopular topics to write about, but then everybody wants to read the book once it's there. So I think particularly like with the polyamory breakup book, people kept saying, "Don't write a book about breakups. It will make it sound like polyamory is a disaster, a failure, never works." At least half the book was about how to prevent breakups. So,
Yeah.
because people don't have much of a roadmap for, how
Yeah.
to avoid breakups or how to see that you're going in a direction that's possibly going to lead there, and maybe there's another solution. But uh, even when I wrote the Jealousy Workbook, people were saying, well, that makes it sound like polyamory is nothing but pain and suffering, and you're just going to be, having psychotic jealousy attacks, and you need a whole book of all these like 50 different techniques and exercises to solve it. So, and then when I wrote about the poly elders, people were saying, oh God, why do you want to write about old people being poly? That just sounds awful. So,
Yeah,
anyway,
that's
I know that wasn't an answer to your question, but I just wanted to mention that it seems like there are a lot of topics that people seem to think are taboo, that we're supposed to make believe polyamory is easy and nothing but fun and games.
yeah,
It's not.
like we have to market it to people and, like, sell it to them. No, no. If this is something you're interested in, here are resources. It's not we're not trying to convince anybody. But,
But I
you
do
mentioned
think we're at that point in the polyamory trajectory that we can say some of those negative things, and
yes.
it doesn't
Yep.
have to be such a disaster. It's like for so many years nobody wanted to see a gay villain in a movie or book because it was like, oh, we don't want to say anything bad about gay people. But you know we're just people like everyone else, and some of us are villains. Let's face it.
Right.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
I so appreciate that because it is in this there's like a deepening, a broadening of the view. We're
Yeah.
not trying to paint a pretty picture, trying to paint an authentic
Yeah.
picture
Right.
Mhm,
Trying to get
mhm.
deeper.
of the range. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Beautiful.
mean, we just spent decades and decades trying to say, okay, us poly people are not all completely like drooling psychopaths who want to molest your children, and that we just like had to
And I'm
spend
not going to steal
years
your husband and
we just had to spend an awful lot of time trying to, present the possibility that it could be a positive and healthy thing. We don't have to do that anymore, thank goodness.
yeah.
That is good. You mentioned a roadmap, and and the idea of having role models, and so in order for us to have role models, in order for there to be a roadmap, somebody needs to have gone down a road, and done it for a while. And so there are people like you who have had polyamorous relationships for decades now. Um, and so what are why? Like, okay, great. You've had a lot of experience that you can share with people and give people ideas about um, how to have relationships like this. What drew you, and what has drawn other elders into polyamory through their lives and into their elderhood?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people I interviewed for the Poly Elders book said things like, when we went into this poly thing 50 years ago, we were drawn to it for the sex, the romance, the excitement, the epic love affairs, and all of, just the transgressive sexuality and all of that, just rejecting all the, heteronormative, beliefs about uh, monogamy and marriage and relationships. But and they often would then say, but now that we're old, we weren't really thinking when we went into this that, wow, this is a really resilient model for aging. This is a really great way to grow old. You have multiple partners to share your companionship, to share finances if needed, or if you choose to. You have more incomes, which can be very, very important if you're elderly and living on a fixed income after retirement. You have more partners and metamors to share caregiving if one person becomes disabled, or in many, many cases, elderly poly women, are widowed, losing one partner or husband or spouse, and then they still have one or two more. And so it's not that you're not distraught with grief over losing your spouse. Of course you are, but you have love and companionship in your life still. And one woman said to me, well, all my other, monogamous women friends are all widowed, and they sleep alone every night. They wake up alone every day. They have 3 meals a day all alone after all these years of having a companion. It's pretty lonely and depressing for them. Whereas older poly folks, whether male, female, or non-binary or otherwise, if you're widowed, if you lose a spouse or partner, it's pretty likely that you'll have another partner that is still going to be there for you. And metamors become even more important when you're older. I've talked to many women who were widowed, and they have a metamor that was widowed with the same person. Now, who on earth has that experience where you've got a metamor who lost their spouse, you lost your spouse, the same person. They know that person as well as you do, and you're both going through the same tragic loss. Who better to comfort each other in that situation?
That's
That's
I
moving.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's moving. It's also inspiring because I wanna paint a different picture. And this I have heard this several times. I am again often talking to people who are they're just considering stepping out of the monogamy box, and often they're in their mid years. My clients tend to be in their like early 40s to mid 50s, so they've spent a long time in monogamy. And one of the things, a phrase that I have heard frequently is, well, we want to do this, but at the end, it's going to be like us in the retirement home together. Like as if this is just going to be a fun playtime, but then we're going to revert to, and I think that it's a lack of imagination. And you just literally stretched imagination with like, wait, but what if? What if this is an increasing, a multiplicative event to shift into polyamory and to not think of monogamy as like the safe thing you return to, but in fact to think of the safety and the community that's built
Yeah.
into a real polycule or a monogamous constellation that works for you and provides this a level of connection that I think we all hope for in our later years, but
Mhm.
monogamy can't promise you that. One of you's going to leave.
At some point,
That's how it
uh,
works.
if not divorced, one of you's going to die,
Yeah,
at least half of marriages had ended in divorce, at least here in the USA. So,
right.
uh, but I mean, I also do want to mention that some couples do return to monogamy, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
Some couples decide either a decision, a choice, or it happens by default.
Yeah,
If you lose a
attrition, if you
Right,
will.
if in many cases, I talk to elders where it was a married couple, gay, straight, or otherwise, and each had outside partners, but one of them, the outside partner, passed away. The outside partner, had to move out of state to live with an adult child that could provide care for them, or that they wanted to be near their adult children, and so they were moving somewhere else. So, so that couple then will decide, well, we don't really want to find other partners now. We don't really have the energy for it. It's just not, we're not highly motivated. Some couples, if they go through a breakup with someone, they'll just decide, we want to spend our time with our children and grandchildren, or we want to spend our time traveling. We don't really want to put that energy into relationships that we may have had the boundless energy for when we were 40 or 50, or even 60, but now we just are focused on other priorities, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I'm hearing you talk about a diversity of reasons why I might choose, and also a lack of there. I'm hearing like a relaxation of what we expect, and
Hmm.
just responding to what feels right as
Hmm.
we age. I'm I Can we just circle back to the sex piece though? Because
Sure.
I feel like the elephant in the room. So I'm a sex educator, and I have yeah, I've sat in many, many classes where, there is this, like, underlying expectation that at some point the sex piece will just somehow evaporate or drop away. Now, I know as a sex educator that that's bupkis. That's not true. Um, but I still think it's worth talking about because it feels like a yes and, but please tell me what you hear. Like as older people are doing polyamory, I feel like it's not all about the sex, but it's also maybe about sex. I mean, for the person, does that stay an individual thing? Is that what you found?
When you say an individual thing, what could you say
Like,
more what you mean by
yeah,
that?
like
I'm not sure.
I feel like some people, their polyamory, their reasons, their motivations, it is largely about sex, and it might stay that way for much longer than they imagine. But for other
Mhm.
people, their polyamory might revolve around other aspects of relating. But I'm curious what you found in your interviews. Did people still center sex in their life? Did they not? Did they move away from that?
For some people, the sex stays very central throughout life. For other people, becomes less important, or it feels just as important, but because of health problems and other issues, it becomes less possible to have the active sex life that they once had. So for a lot of people, it's not lack of interest. It's more that there are some kind of medical problems that make it more complicated, and so sex becomes less frequent, or it has to change to a different type of sex because of whatever is going on medically. Uh, but what's really was so interesting to me and really heartening is that as people age in poly relationships, if one person does lose interest in sex or is too ill to really or be able to have sex comfortably, or really be able to do sex on a frequent basis, their partner or partners are not forced into celibacy, which is
Right.
what happens in so many monogamous marriages. One partner becomes sick or disabled, or just completely loses interest in sex for any number of reasons, and then their partner is either has to cheat, or has to divorce them, or has to be resigned to celibacy for the rest of their lives. And that's so one of the things that's so great about polyamory is that if one person no longer wants sex, or is too sick or ill, whatever, to have sex, their partner has other partners that are sexually active and are sexually eager and enthusiastic. So that often was cited as a really strong uh, component of polyamory, but when one partner is disabled, it's not just about the person being disabled and not wanting sex. It's about that person, their partner or spouse, being able to get love, affection, and sex somewhere else, come back to their partner refreshed, happy, and loving and caring, eager to take care of their spouse, rather than feeling angry and resentful that they're, stuck taking care of someone and not really feeling like they're getting much out of the relationship because they're in that role of a primary caregiver. And that's very different than the usual monogamous relationship where people get burnout and caregiver burnout, and even sometimes leading to spousal abuse or spousal abandonment and divorce, and that doesn't need to happen in a poly situation.
Right. It feels like a conversation that I've had before around, the what ifs that we all, hopefully are spending a little time wondering into
Yeah.
what if, but
Mhm.
rather than a sort of foreclosure of like, well, what if? Well, I just hope that doesn't happen. I just hope one of us doesn't become disabled. Like that's facing a, yeah. I mean, we all hope, but realistically, we ideally will live long enough to experience the ups and downs, and disablement through aging isn't it. I mean, my parents both died relatively young, so did Ken's. We see aging
Mhm.
as an like, yay, so thrilled. So too, I so thrilled to have the opportunity to experience the complexity of, yeah,
Mhm.
ability will not always be the same. It's going to change. I'm
Well,
enthused to think about the flexibility of the system. The system has built
yes.
into it this, so we don't have to have the conversation actually because of the disablement, because of the change of ability, but instead it's no, this is how we relate. There's already the groundwork. So I'm hearing that poly elders are at an advantage because it's not about I'm going to go seek sex outside because you've changed, but because we already did some of the foundational work to create this way of loving multiply in our life.
Well, and
That sounds
usually
like a
that
real
person
advantage.
will. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
It just sounds like a huge advantage. I'm thinking about myself. Like that would be a hard conversation to have. Ken has MS. I wouldn't want, we've been polyamorous for 15 years. I wouldn't want to have that conversation with him when he loses
Yeah.
function. I am
Right.
so glad that we already have that baseline of, yeah, yeah, you
That,
might need to get some of your needs met elsewhere.
that conversation would land different
Differently, yes,
in
right.
in the different contexts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not even so much, well, we've already had the conversation. It's that in most of the people I talk to, they already had an outside partner they'd been seeing for 20 or
Right.
25 years.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, well, I'm going to go find someone. It's like, I have this wonderful relationship and it's been meeting a lot of my needs all along.
Yeah.
And now it may be meeting more of my needs, or now I may feel more like, wow, I need that person a little more in my life. And often that also extends to that person helps with caregiving, or, provides in some way for caregiving, or the person who does have the disability or illness, they usually also have another partner that is helping with caregiving, helping financially and in other ways. And, I think the disability rights movement is a huge help for us all in the poly world, in that disabled people have claimed their full sexuality and are like, in your face, you temporarily able-bodied people, as they call us. They
Yes.
call us the temporarily able-bodied because it is a temporary state. It won't always exist. So, they're like, in your face. We're full sexual beings. We claim it. We own it. You may not like it that we're disabled and we have great sex, and you don't want to hear about it or know about it because you think we're somehow desexed by the fact that we're disabled. Well, poly elders can really learn a lot from that, and to
Yeah.
really be able to fully claim their sexuality and claim sex and sexuality as a choice, as well as claiming celibacy as a choice if someone decides, I don't want to have sex anymore, or I
Yeah.
don't want to have sex in this relationship anymore. There are lots of people that most poly elders do continue to have a happy, active sex life, far into their elder years. But some don't, and they have the right to just say that openly and to negotiate for that. And they're still in happy, healthy relationships.
Yeah.
The sex part may be either less frequent or just not there, but everything else is still the same.
Yeah.
Kathy, you said a word way at the beginning that has just stuck in my head, and it's resilience.
Hmm.
The adaptability, the to all of the things that you just mentioned.
Hmm.
And going to Jolie's point, the conversations about what changes we might have or require or ask for, they happen in a very different emotional context. There doesn't have to be blame associated with either the disability or the caretaking capabilities or all of that.
Hmm.
That's amazing. I love that, and I think about my mother's experience. And originally, I was thinking, wow, how nice it would have been for her to have had more experience. My father died when she was 47. And if
Oh,
she and if
wow.
she had had um more support around her, like more intimate support, relationships of whatever kind that
Hmm.
would immediately like step in and say, "Okay, here, I'm here. What do you need?" And she didn't
Hmm.
have that because they were had a very monogamous relationship and those kinds of things didn't
Mhm.
happen. But now I'm thinking about, yeah, but what about the several years beforehand of caretaking as my father was ill? Like, wow, what a different experience she would have had if she had had people who were also stepping up and saying, "Oh, I have a relationship with you in which I have committed to being here for you emotionally and supportive." And wow, what a different experience all of us are the us children and my mother and father would have had, and the resilience that I see, that the potential for resilience is just, I said moving, it moves me because I think of
Oh.
what could have been in those situations. But it also makes me think about my mother's capabilities in the polyamorous realm and how that would have gone for her,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
so you've spoken with lots of people who have been poly in for whatever length of time. Do you find people like are older people um, navigating polyamorous relationships better than younger people? I don't know. Do you have that sort of sense of how things are going?
Well, a question that was often asked to me is, are are older people, are elders good at polyamory, or is polyamory good for elders? And the answer is both are true. And it's not really a fair comparison with younger people and older people because naturally, the older polys, been at it for so many more years and have so much more experience, and certainly have made plenty of mistakes, and managed to pick themselves up and dust themselves off and move on. So it's not really fair to say, well, they're better at it than younger people. They just have more years of experience and more different types of experiences. I also think the people that have been doing it for so long, obviously it works for them, and they're more uh, oriented towards it. And so they're the ones that are going to be likely to succeed and continue with it as a lifelong relationship model. Uh, I think a lot of younger people don't know yet whether this is the lifestyle and the relationship orientation that is going to be their whole life, or is that going to be just for a few years or for a decade or for a particular stage in their lives. So I think if people that really found that it made them unhappy dropped out and said, this really isn't for us. And, more power to them if they figure that out, that this is making me unhappy, or this is just way more work than I really have the spoons for, or I would rather spend this time and energy getting my PhD, or trying to end world hunger, or, raising children, or, doing something else. I'd rather not put this amount of time and energy into this thing, polyamory. So, those are all completely valid choices. So I don't think it's so much that older people are better at it. I just think if they manage to succeed at it and continue and make it their lifelong relational model, then they probably just have more of an orientation towards it, and they've put the time and effort in. They've chosen to make that a focus, to make that one of the major things in their life, not the only thing, but they've really chosen to put some time and energy into it, and other people would prioritize other things instead.
Well, Kathy, that I think that brings us to a really an interesting intersection of, you know, uh, what about the people who don't discover polyamory earlier in life and find themselves elders wondering, is this the move for me? I have people in my client roster who are in their 60s, early 70s, and they're just exploring. And I'm curious if you talked with people who are coming into it later, not having 50 years of experience, but they're trying to find their way out of the monogamy box into something else.
Well, it's there's two main groups that are in the category you describe, coming into polyamory later in life. One group is couples that have been monogamous and raised children and had careers, and now the kids are grown and gone, and a lot of them are either retired or are in the process of kind of winding down careers. And for the first time in their lives, they've had kind of the time and energy available to them to contemplate doing something a little bit different. Particularly, a lot of people that might, a lot of married couples that might have tried polyamory many years ago, they might have tried it if they weren't afraid of losing their jobs and losing custody of their children. But now their children are grown and gone. Uh, and they're retiring from jobs. So and oftentimes they didn't want to alienate their parents, but now the parents are dead, and
So they feel
so
free. Liberation.
they feel a lot freer, yeah, a lot freer, and they have more time and energy, and there's very little in terms of their fear of consequences. It
Yeah.
was a very real fear, losing custody of your children. It was a very real and present danger, and losing your job definitely was real. It still is to some extent, but not nearly as much. Um, Now, the main concern, there are two main concerns of that group: the married couples that have kids and grandkids, and kids are grown and they're retiring from jobs. The two main concerns they have are, will my adult children keep the grandchildren away from me? And that does
Mhm.
happen. That, I've heard from many of many people. My adult daughter or my son says, "Well, I don't want to have to, explain to our kids that Grandma has this weird sex life with the two boyfriends or husbands or whatever." So, uh, the other concern they have is the possibility that they may need to move into assisted living or a care facility at some point, and will they face discrimination? Will they
Mm.
face hostility? Will they receive poor care, or will they be refused to even live in a facility? So those are two key things they're concerned about. But going back to people that discover polyamory or try polyamory in their older years, that's one big group because they've had too many fears of consequences in the past to try it, or just been too busy with jobs and kids, and just that
Right.
I just that's not an option. Too busy with everything else. I don't have 5 minutes, much less time for another partner. But the other group are uh, heterosexual women who are divorced or widowed, and are seeking a male partner and discover that all the men are married or dead. And so at their age, their dating pool is very small, and they decide to try a relationship with a man that's partnered already. And I talked to many women, interviewed many women that in that group that discovered polyamory worked really well for them, even though they had been always felt they were very strongly monogamously oriented. And the reason it worked so well for them is that the reasons they felt they needed monogamy no longer existed. When they were younger, they wanted and needed a monogamous relationship, they felt, because they wanted a man who would share the financial and labor responsibilities of raising children, and to be there full time with them, raising children and providing financial support, of sharing the financial burden. And they wanted a full time companion. But now that they're older, the kids are grown and gone, and many women said, I tried dating men who were annoyed that I spent so much time with my kids and grandkids. Having a boyfriend was like getting in the way of my family life. I didn't really want him underfoot all the time because he was complaining I was spending too much time with my kids and grandkids. So, uh, so actually having a boyfriend that's, married or partnered is a plus. And many of these women deferred goals like getting a college education or starting a business or starting a nonprofit or working in some kind of uh, political activism work or something. They've deferred those things all their lives because they were so busy working and raising kids. Now they have that opportunity. They don't want a husband who's going to get in their way of fulfilling those goals. So having a part-time boyfriend works for them.
Yeah, I so appreciate that image because I think about all the ways that our needs change as we age in ways that we can't predict. We don't know perfectly. We don't know how it's gonna work out. I'm loving the image of this older woman recognizing, oh, I just don't need what I needed before. And that doesn't mean that I don't also want to connect with someone sexually. And uh, relationally and to be with someone. I love the expansiveness that there is in just redesigning through, yeah, what are my actual needs now? Like I have to actually figure out what those needs are before I can decide which relationship model might be the right fit. Um
Right, and it doesn't work for all women who think they have always been monogamous. Some monogamous women find, this makes me feel sharing a man with someone else makes me feel fundamentally unloved and disrespected, and
right.
I'm not comfortable with that. So
Yep.
it doesn't always work, but I was surprised to find how frequently it did seem to work.
Well, I love the picture you paint of a woman who's like, okay, I have things I want to do. And I don't think I want a full time salary husband. I'm looking for like a contract hourly boyfriend so that I don't have to put
Yeah, like I'm
all my
gonna go on
time in.
WeWork and just
Yeah.
find like
Yeah.
just the right. That's it. I like this.
Yep.
I'm rebranding the dating apps as like, yeah, I gotta find my contract boyfriend
Yep.
because I cannot even.
And it's just the hours I want and not other hours. Yep.
Well, and some women said, I've been married for many years and now I'm divorced or my husband has passed away. I do not want a man that I have to cook for, clean for, take care of, nor do I want to meet a man now that I'm going to have to nurse through maybe 8 or 10 years of illness and disability. At 70 years old, I do not want to start with that. You know,
Yeah.
It's not a crass thing like, oh, I don't want to take care of someone. It's more like that's the kind of thing you sign up for if when you get married when you're 30 or even 40. You're kind of signing up for that. But at this point, these women do not want to sign up for really having to take care of someone full time or, be that wife. They just
Yeah.
don't want that role. They've
Yeah.
done
Yeah.
that
The
before.
the conversations about, imbalances of emotional labor, those are accurate. I've
Mhm.
been working very hard to, to hold up to build up my support of the emotional labor in our household, contributing. But it's very obvious because of how much I have to like pay attention that I had not before.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so if you're with someone looking to be with someone who just isn't thinking about that, yep, you're going to be doing a lot of the emotional labor. And people are starting, I think, women are starting to wake up to the fact that, oh, I don't have to do that anymore.
mhm.
Yeah. What
I
if I
can
just don't
spend my
have to
energy other
retrain a
ways.
man? What if I
Well,
just don't?
yeah, because that's work, man. That's a lot.
Or some women will say, well, he has a wife for that.
Yeah.
Okay, sure,
He
yeah,
already
Right.
has a wife for that. I'm not signing up for that.
I don't have to do
yeah,
that. I'm gonna build this relationship to have the parts of it that I want, but it
Mhm,
doesn't
yes,
have
mhm.
to be
yep,
the all-encompassing model that I had
yeah,
before.
Well,
So
and I see those same women, though, eventually, if the partner does develop an illness, they will step right up and share in the care, but there's a wife that's doing some of that too. You're
yeah,
not alone
not
doing that.
alone.
So, and yes, as you talked about, Ken, the emotional labor, and you're a younger generation that was probably, raised by feminist mothers, whereas the men in my generation and older, they were raised in the 1940s and 50s, and so they were raised with very backwards ideas about, marriage and relationships and who's supposed to, wash the dishes and who's supposed to, do all the emotional labor in the relationship.
Yeah. Kathy, as we wrap up, I have a question that I feel like it, it might seem negative, but I think it's really important to have this question out there. And that is, did you hear about regrets? Did anyone that you were talking to have regrets about being poly or practicing polyamory? Um, Especially in those elder years, I'm imagining people looking back and really doing some reckoning. What did you hear about regret?
Yes, well, life review is a normal phase or a normal uh, activity that elders participate in and engage in, regardless of whether they're poly or anything else. It's natural that as we only have a short time left in our lives, and we have a lot more past than future in our lives at this point, that we would be looking back at our lives. And I don't think anyone, whether you're poly or monogamous or anything else, gets to their elder years without having some regrets. But the people that interviewed and the clients of mine that I talked to about this, uh, their their regrets were small. And mostly they were just really happy that they had the willingness, the courage, and just the sort of adventurousness to try something and do something that was pretty unusual at the time when they were getting involved in it. But the regrets they had were that they had stumbled and fumbled at the beginning because they had no role models, they had no books, they had no podcasts like yours. The internet did not exist. I know it's hard to believe, but for most of my adult life, the internet did not exist, and so there just were no resources whatsoever. And even when I started in private practice as a counselor a little over 30 years ago, all of the clients that came to me had already been to 3 or 4 other therapists who were shamed and stigmatized for their desires to be polyamorous, and we're told that this was pathological, and this was going to destroy their marriage, and that they were immature and they couldn't commit, and all of those things. So I can tell you how much damage I had to undo from previous therapists who just didn't know any better at the time. So those are the kinds of regrets that were expressed, were that people made mistakes just because they had no resources to turn to learn. There were no classes, no poly discussion groups and groups that like we have now. So that they made mistakes, and in some cases hurt people inadvertently, because they just really didn't know what they were doing. I mean, we still see people doing that today, even though they have all the resources in the
Every
world.
day.
Yeah.
Every day. I wouldn't have a job if that weren't true. And isn't it only natural? Like, we make mistakes in relationships all the time, and having resources is awesome, but then we have to learn how to walk the talk. We have to
Right.
do it. It's not easy. It's like all
No.
relationships. They bring us our challenges and our foibles right up close. But I'm hearing that the regrets that you heard also, there's a communal aspect to them, something that we can all address collectively, which is we can remember not to judge, disparage, or get too high and mighty about the way that we do relationships being the right way, and just listen to each other, listen to those experiences. And I imagine many poly elders having an immense amount of wisdom to share from going through the ups and downs, being through the challenges of figuring it out. And it doesn't mean that their answers will be correct to apply directly to our life, but I'm so appreciative of your story gathering, right? Your willingness to gather this together so that we can, well, treat elderhood as the resource that it is. It's
Yes.
this there is this deep wisdom, but
Mhm.
when we shunt it off to the side because we say things like we don't want to hear about old people having sex, or we forget that the things we are struggling with, people have struggled with for decades. And when we
Well,
miss that, such a
It's
loss.
yeah, and the thing that I hear the most from younger people is kind of a very strong hostility towards the fact that the vast majority of poly elders live in dyads, live in couples, and almost all of them have significant long-term relationships outside of that dyad. But because in recent years the um relationship anarchy model and other more non-hierarchical models are extremely popular, at least in some places, or among some groups, whether they are working for them or are successful for them, I can't really say, because it's so varies so much from person to person and relationship to relationship. But I hear a lot of hostility towards the fact that that is the model that has worked for people who are older and are elders now. And even though those relationships have stood the test of time, and most of their outside relationships have been going on for decades and have stood the test of time. And you could say it's hierarchical because it's usually a couple that's like legally married to each other and lives together and owns a house together, or shares finances together. But it's not so hierarchical after all. If these are people that have been, if the outside partners are people that have been really significant in your life for decades, are very much a part of your family.
Right. This is where it becomes important to remember that the labels we're using to describe each other can't actually convey what's happening in our
Mhm.
families, in our loving relationships, and we have to be willing to listen before, rather than dismiss based on a very cursory glance at the information we're receiving.
Mhm.
I want to
Kathy,
say
oh, go
one
ahead.
one last thing, which is you meant when we were talking about regret, you were talking about the people who wished that they'd had resources early on, and they fumbled and they stumbled, and we have a little bit of experience in that, and we've watched the evolution of resources for polyamory. And I want to right now acknowledge everyone, including you, Kathy, who has provided that information for us now. Like, all those fumbles and stumbles are what have created the resources that we now have access to. So if you're listening and you're feeling like, oh, I wish I'd done it better, well, thank you for sharing your experience with us in a way that lets us learn from it and being the elders the whole time.
Well, I always say, please learn from our mistakes so you can make new and creative mistakes of your own.
Yeah, we'll do our
Yes.
best, Kathy. We're going to
All
do our
right.
darndest to make our own unique mistakes.
Don't make
Kathy,
the old, boring
yeah,
ones we've
Right?
already made.
no,
There
yeah,
are.
no need to do that. We don't need to repeat. Kathy, would you just tell the audience where can they find you if people are interested in learning more about your work?
I have a website, kathylabriola.com.
Excellent, excellent. We'll make sure that that is linked in the show notes. And for everybody listening, I'm going to link the books. I highly recommend adding Kathy's books to your bookshelf. When I was doing my own jealousy research, I was deeply grateful to be able to look at the methods that you were teaching. And I still see people every week who are like, yep, I got the jealousy workbook. It's right here. I'm working it. So thank you so much for
Yes.
putting that out there.
Thank you.
It's such a great jumping off point for people who are like, I got to do something about this one piece. And thank you for continuing the work and building our knowledge base. I really so appreciate it.
I want to add one last thing, and that I've just recently finished writing a new addition to my first book, Love in Abundance. And the only reason I needed to write that new edition was because so many great things have happened in the world of polyamory since that book was written in 2008. And
That's
so
amazing.
I just want to mention that because it's so thrilling that so much has changed for the better. And so
Yeah,
there was a lot more to say about that.
that's
Oh,
outstanding.
that's
I
wonderful. I
love
can't
that.
wait.
So
I
I want
love
to
that.
end on a positive note there, that
Love
things
it.
Yeah.
are
Love
way
it.
better than they were even in 2008.
They really are. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kathy.
Thank you so
Really
much.
appreciative.
Thank you. It's been really fun.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliquiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com and find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.